Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. And today I am utterly delighted to be joined once again by Dave Coplin. Dave, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Toby. How about yourself?
Really, really good. Thank you. Really good. And I love your setup over there. It's looking ultra professional and super impressed. Listen, for those, if you've been fortunate enough to follow Dave through the lockdown, you'd have seen some incredible stuff that he's been doing over YouTube and adding a whole load of value. There could be no one, I think, more relevant to be talking to about at the moment after releasing these books. Business Reimagined, The Rise of the Humans. Your business, The Envisioners, has really looked at the future of work for a long, long time. And I remember us talking probably, 2-3 years ago, however that is now, about you talking about what the future of work's looking like and how, you know, the huge benefits of remote working, etc. And I, for one, understood it and resisted it for a little while. And all of a sudden, a couple of months ago, we had this thrown at us. Your YouTube show has been doing some amazing things, sort of highlighting and helping people navigate everyone through this. Just give us a brief intro to what you've been doing through this time and your background and why it's so relevant right now for everyone to hear you.
Yeah, you bet, Toby. So bizarrely, about 7 years ago, when I wrote the first book, Business Reimagined, and Business Reimagined is essentially about flexible and remote working. And off the back of that, I did a presentation at the RSA, and they made it into one of those really brilliant 9-minute animated videos about how to rethink the world of work, right? And it was great for a few years, but I kind of forgot about it, other than I've been, trying to work with organizations and getting them to just understand the power of flexible and remote working, which for me isn't working from home, but is in fact choosing the most appropriate location for the work you're about to do. So sometimes that's the office, sometimes it's home, sometimes it's a cafe or your customer's site or anything like that. And, I'd kind of forgotten about it because the thing you realize is that you're kind of pushing wet string uphill with a lot of people because it's just the ease of the Monday to Friday. I know where I'm going to be in the office. And even though I'm carrying a bit of plastic and glass with me that I could as easily be sat on a beach looking at, or as in, my office, it's just easier for me to be in the office. And so some people did it, some people didn't. And then this happened. And what was really weird for me, like having spent a long time thinking about this and trying to get people to engage with this, for the first couple of weeks, I was really lost. I mean, I just lost all sense of, so what now? Now everybody's doing what I've been asking them. So they're finally having that experience. So I'm like, what's the point of me and what's the story? And then, of course, you realize that everybody's been on this sort of roller coaster in so many different ways. And we started lockdown, it was all high-fiving each other on Zoom calls, and this is brilliant, I love this. And then about halfway through, it's like, oh dear God, get me out of here. If I have to do one more day, Jesus, and we've started to realize the good bits about remote working and also some of the things that we miss. And what I could see happening as a common theme with the clients that I was talking to and the people around the world of business that I was talking to is that people get that we are not necessarily all going to run back into the office, and we're going to be doing this for a while. So given we're going to be doing it for a while, how do we make the best of it? How do we really understand what it means to our organization? And I knew just from the history I've got in the topic that, the whole thing about flexible working, the most important thing is about how you get the culture and leadership of the organization right, because without those things, it's really, really problematic. And then, of course, you realize that, we're in a world where if you want to talk to people about this, you've got to engage with them in this kind of way. So I just thought, what's the best way to drive this conversation, given that none of us alone know the answers, but collectively, I'm sure that we can not so much come up with the answers, but help people find their own answers. I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could facilitate, a weekly show, 30 minutes, where we talk to a whole different range of people about what we want the future of work to be. And it's based on this premise and this principle, A, of the rise of the humans. So, my DNA is essentially, I believe technology makes us better humans. If we use it well, if we use it in the right way, we can achieve more as humans than we could do without it. And that's what I'm really passionate and driven about and have been all my life. So that's number one. And then number two is there is no going back. The biggest fear I have is that we go through this process of lockdown and whatever social distancing becomes in the office. And even though, you know, as I describe it, we're 2/3 of the way through the tunnel. We've walked over broken glass and hot coals, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And for the first time in our lives, the light at the end of the tunnel isn't an oncoming train. It's our gateway into the 21st century. Even though we can almost taste that sort of fresh air, there's lots of people saying, yeah, but I don't know what's between here and there. And you know, I know what it was like in the old ways, and you know, it's just easy for me to go back to how it used to be. And I just think if we do that, we will have lost so much. If you look at the benefit, you know, and I'm not saying that there aren't challenges, and I'm not saying that there aren't things that we have to rethink about this world of work, but we've been able to do a lot of things. We know that productivity is up on average 13% for people working from home. However, we know that burnout is twice as likely to occur. We know that the impact we're having on the planet is far less than it used to be. For the most part, people are engaging with their lives in a very different way. They are having more time whilst working more efficiently or more effectively as well. So there's some magic in there that we owe it to ourselves to unpack. And so the live stream, it goes out every Wednesday at 6 o'clock, but obviously you watch it whenever you feel like it. And we've just tried to curate different angles, different perspectives on what's happening. So last week we had this brilliant guy, Dr. Brennan Jacoby, who's a philosopher, just superb. He's got this theory about we can learn from people like Aristotle about the principles that make virtual working work well. And so he'd written this report called The Virtues of Virtual. So we explored the virtues that make remote working well. Week before that, we were taking a long-term view on the future of work. And we were talking to a couple of educational specialists. One was a policy advisor, another was a sort of a deputy head, but sort of the ICT lead for a school, who again are looking at schools and thinking, these poor guys, they've worked so hard over the last few weeks and pivoted so well, but they're feeling a bit battered and bruised. How do we help them? How do we support them to come back in September and not go back to one adult, 30 kids, but go back to a blended, a more digital approach to education? And so throughout all of that, we're just trying to, again, not provide answers, but to provide a platform for people to engage in the conversation, just like you're doing here, Toby, so that we can all, you know, because the answers are going to be different for each of us, but they're going to fall in line with a similar theme. So it's how do we just curate that conversation?
I think there's a really interesting. I mean, it's such a fascinating topic that you're positioned in, and the shows, as you said, has brought out some really, you know, some great debate and great concepts. And there's so many things that people do, and you know, we hear Microsoft, your old business, talking about you know, the rate of digital innovation. There's this nag at the back of everyone's head, isn't there, about how easy it would be to go back to business as usual after all the advances that we've seen. And I think that's very prevalent. But I also think there's this fascinating, the thing that's really amazing me at the moment is the sort of the curve of acceptance of this new norm. So you had people at the start who say, I don't want to work from home, I can never work from home because of this, and you know, I want to miss the office. And then there's they're there and they're saying, you know, I need to have human interaction again. I've been isolated. I'm going up the walls. I can't be in here. And then it's right, you know, the government say you can start to come back into the office. People are saying, actually, I'm now a little bit anxious about coming back into the office and all this sort of thing. And it's a gradual sort of formation, but it's very, very interesting to see where people are saying, because you give them the choice now, and most people are saying, right, I'm going to be at home for you know, the vast majority of the week and such, isn't it?
And that's my hope, right, Toby, is that it's not the extreme of we're never going to go into the office or the office is dead. Although I do think the open plan office needs to die, not just for medical reasons, but we might come back to that. It's about the flip. You know, the sort of the stereotypical sort of London working week for office workers is, you know, Monday to Thursday in the office, and Friday's work from home day, right? And that's flexible working apparently. Well, actually, it's not flexible working; it's working from home on a Friday. If we could flip that and say, actually, do you know what? Monday to Thursday, you're working from some other location. It might be your home. It might be a local, you know, cohabited workspace, whatever works for you kind of thing. And then one day a week, you go into the office. That would be a massive result. And it's this sort of, you know, trying to make sure that we only actually go to the office when we need to be in the office for whatever reason, rather than the default is I'm just going to go there. If we could make that flip, that would have such a dramatic impact on all sorts of things, you know, our own well-being, productivity of our organizations in a good way, you know, the planet, it would also affect lots of things about the way that we think about cities, the way that we think about real estate, all of those big sort of trophy offices in London, and typically in finance, the glass and steel buildings become much less relevant in that world, and people's choice about where they live becomes much more relevant. Why would you want to be in a tiny place in London because it's close to the office, when you could be in a place with a bit more space, a lot less money, because you're not going into the office that much. So there's sort of the compromise on the commute is kind of worth it. So all of these things have to come into what we can do.
I think one of the interesting things that people have been pushing back slightly is that in tech it's very easy to move people away and say, right, okay, you're working independently, you can have your Slack channels, etc., etc. Where we've seen some pushback on this a little bit is sales leaders talking about the collaboration and culture of a team and a business, and one day a week putting them together is fearful for a number of different teams. How do you with companies who work so hard, and the sheer noise that we've had around culture being so important to businesses and business growth, and the DNA and tribalism that you get from all of that, when this dissolves a little bit more, and people are sort of more separated, and particularly in sales, when you're talking about leads being passed to each other, and firing each other up, and sales floors, busy sales floors, etc., etc. How does that develop, and how's that replaced?
Well, I think again, there's a baby in the bathwater we've always got to be aware of. So none of this is about never being physically, close to each other, physically connected, but it is maybe changing the ratio a little. And what I would argue is that all organizations just need to define where their balance is. And it might not be one day a week, it might be 2 or 3 days a week that you're physically together. But I would be looking to make the emphasis on, I only need to be together when that actually adds value to what I'm going to do. And you've got to be really nuanced about where value is. The other thing is that we lose in this sort of virtual connection. We don't understand the etiquette for how we operate it. And so I don't know about you, but what I'm seeing a lot of is like Zoom calls are like all business. Do you know what I mean? You dial in, it's like, how are you doing? Right, first item on the agenda is, we'd never run a bloody meeting like that. In a real physical meeting, it would be, how you doing? What were you up to on the weekend? How's the kids? Or like, well, we should do that as well. And because the problem with virtual is that we lose all of those opportunities for the social connection that would punctuate our day, the strolling down the corridor, sitting by the coffee machine, that sort of stuff. But we shouldn't lose sight of that, and we should be able to replicate some of it, not all of it, by just a different approach to meetings, a bit more social connection. And I'm not talking like some people are doing sort of the mandatory 5 o'clock social Teams call, and it's like, just no, that's not going to work. But it's understanding those sort of human nuances, and then add to that, physical experiences when you all come together. Somebody a couple of weeks ago had this lovely concept. Do you remember the office away day? Right. Yeah. So you would go off, they're going to build a bloody raft or paint a school or something like that. Right. Well, we should have the inverse of that, right? It should be the office in day, where one day we go to the office and we do team building stuff in the office. And maybe we do that once a month or once a week or whatever works for you and your team and your organization. But we use that as the moment to build that social capital that we can trade off for the time that we're dispersed. So it's, for me, with all of these things, let's not hold our hands up and say, well, it's just too hard, I can't do it. Yeah. Let's just find a way to solve it. Let's find a way to make it a bit better. And we're never going to exactly replicate a world of being in the office all the time, but that's not all bad, right? In the same way that it's not all good. We've just got to pivot a bit more and just understand what works well offline and what works well online.
Flexible working is something, and the difference between working from home and flexible working is an interesting one as well, isn't it? Because one of the big trends of recent years has been the agile meeting, the stand-up, and getting people together. I know that's been difficult for people as well over this, and saying, right, okay, look, flexible starting times, etc., etc. How do you get all the team together to communicate with that? And do you lose traction from not having everyone together for that? How do you deal with that on a flexible working? Is that about location, or is that about time, or is that about?
Well, I mean, it depends on your culture. So my recommendation is that synchronization point is crucial. And whether it's daily or not, that's kind of depends on you and your business and your team. But to have a moment when you know that everybody will be together, even if they're, you know, virtually connected rather than physically in the same space, is super important, because it kind of sets the tone for the rest of what you do. But that's all it needs to be. So once you've done that, then I think flexible working kicks in. And one of the things that, you know, I don't think we're doing well in, I'm making sweeping generalizations here, but what I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of Zoom burnout. And I'm seeing a lot of people who have basically sort of this sense of needing to prove that they're still available and they're there. And so they say yes to every Zoom call, and they spend literally from 9 a.m. till often 9 p.m. just in Zoom calls. And to me, it's a bit like, do you remember when we all got email on our mobile phones? And I'm talking like on our Blackberries in the 2000s and all that sort of stuff. And instantly we were all just on email all the time because we could. And, you know, maybe sometimes we worked for those horrible organizations who expected us to be on email, you know, at 11 o'clock at night and would measure our performance and how quickly, you know, we responded. And in a funny way, Zoom's kind of replaced that mentality. And what we've got to do is we've got to empower individuals. And this really comes down to the change of leadership style that's required in a dispersed organization, where it's much more about empowerment rather than command and control. So yeah, there might be a 9 a.m. You know, stand-up meeting virtually. You're all expected to be there. But after that, I really don't care. You know, you work when you like, you do what you like. These are the objectives that we've got to meet. And if we don't meet them, then there's a conversation we're going to have. But I trust you. I trust you enough to employ you. Why wouldn't I trust you enough to make judgments about when it's best for you to work? And part of the thing that I love about what we've embraced about working from home now is working from home has to encompass our whole lives. You know, when we go to the office, it's work, Dave, when Dave is in the office, right? So all I'm thinking about in terms of the things I have to do is work. When I'm at home, yes, I've got to think about work, but I've also got to think about all of my other, you know, relationships and commitments, and they're part of the day. And actually understanding that package and empowering people to be able to make their own choices as when it's appropriate for them to work or feed the kids or take the dogs for a walk or go and wash the car or whatever it might be, has to be part of that life. And when people can construct their sort of priorities on that holistic view of who they are and what they do, it's very powerful, and actually it's a lot more effective. You know, so if I can say, and this requires a lot of collaboration with your team and what I call your extended team, and that's your family. You know, there'll be times when I'm writing a book or you know creating a new presentation, and I'm like, seriously guys, I need some headspace, right? So just could you just leave me alone for a bit? Don't, you know, come in, don't ask me questions, because I need to get my heads down. And as long as I've had that conversation, people respect that, and I can crack on. But you have to have that dialogue. You have to make it happen for it to work.
Yeah.
And so I think it's understanding it. The other bit I love about this is, do you remember before the pandemic, Toby, is if we were on a conference call, probably rather than a video call, and one of us was at home, you'd do that thing where you'd be like, look, to the kids, like, could you just sort out, I'm on a call for like the next half an hour, just leave me alone, leave the room, I want the dogs out, I want just go away. Well, now look at what's happening. The kids are coming in, the dogs are barking, and everybody realizes that, you know what, we're all human, we all got kids, dogs, noisy neighbors, whatever it might be, and it's just life. It's no big deal. Even, you know, if you're on a call with a customer, it's no big deal. And what I love about that is it kind of lowers the barrier to entry for people embracing this kind of style of working and this way of working. And I think as long as we manage it, and as long as we manage it professionally, then I think we'll all do okay out of it. You know, that's the thing, is about how do I make my digital interactions as rich and as positive as my physical interactions would be. And if we can do that, if we can bring all of those things together, we emerge from that, you know, like I say, more productive, we have a better well-being, and we're also, you know, more effective in our personal lives, in our relationships, in our, how we sort of spend time with our family as well, because we can be more purposeful about it. Yeah. The thing that we've got to avoid, though, and it's kind of the world that a lot of us are in right now, is it takes a long time to learn those lessons. Too many people, and this speaks to the burnout issue, and it was another stat from the same report that was talking about in the UK, since lockdown, people are working on average an extra week every month just because they're on lockdown. And part of that is because, you know, your commute is, you know, in my case, I'm in the back of my front room. So my commute is, you know, literally from the sofa to the desk, right? So it's quite easy for me in the evening when watching the telly just to say, yeah, exactly. And so I've got to be quite disciplined with myself and say, actually, no, I'm only going to go to work when I'm going to work. I'm not just going to drift into work, in the same way that if I'm at work, I don't want to drift into not being at work. So we've got to allow individuals the time to build these skills, to build these new approaches to work that maybe we've not had before. Things like, you know, another thing that people miss is that the importance of the commute, which I think many people have only really come to terms with as a result of lockdown. As much as a pain in the backside as commutes are, they're actually quite helpful to mark the transition, you know, from domestic to professional and professional to domestic again. And so it gives us time to spin up or spin down. And, you know, again, in 3 steps from my desk to the sofa, I don't have that time anymore. So I need to invent a new way of decompressing after work, or to spinning up. And it might be, as soon as I finish work, I'll go and take the dogs. It might be something else, but it is something that has to happen. And then all of these are like the hallmarks of the attributes of the culture that we need to build if we're going to really make this work for us, without, you know, compromising, you know, our mental health or our ability to contribute for the organization.
Yeah. I think there's a very interesting sort of subtext to all of this, which is you've touched on a couple of times, which is leadership, right?
Yeah.
And you know, this is the first time where I've had a remote business in 20 years of leading teams. I've got to tell you, it's challenging, right? There isn't a playbook which you've you know, many of us have been given for this, other than of course these.
I see what you did there. Very good.
Anyways, but it's also something there where you're kind of building the plane as you're flying it, in many senses. But you've looked at this, and this has been something you've been passionate about for a long time, and you're way more experienced than the vast majority of people out there. If you were to look down the camera and say, look, here's 2 or 3 things which are going to make a dramatic impact to the way that you can really add value as a leader to your team and to your business, and come out of this productively and profitably from it, what would you pass on as those sort of golden tips?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is such a great area to be in, and I think this is, you know, really the keys to making this work is in how we now approach leadership. And, you know, some of it was described really well to me a couple of weeks ago. It's like the difference between industrial management and I'm going to call it 21st century leadership. So industrial management and industrial management is what we've all grown up with and what we've all grown up around. And it is the production line, and it's the time and motion study, and it's the fixation on the efficiency of work. It's the process oriented work. And, you know, whilst that's great in a production line sense, and it's okay in you know, certainly in the 20th century, it starts to get pushed a bit too far in the 21st century, because you realize all these processes we have for work, the way we manage our employees, the way we measure their progress, are based on sort of Victorian principles that not just the technology, but our new way of working are, you know, it breaks those rules. It's not relevant for them. You know, what does it matter? You know, do I clock in when I'm working from home? Do I clock in? Do I have a timesheet? How does that work? So it's understanding that leadership now is less about command and control and much more about empowerment. And I know that sounds really fluffy and lovey, but it really is. As a strong leader, as a good leader, what you're looking to do is, based on the team that I've got, how am I going to set them up to be able to do their best work? I want them to be self-starters. I want them to be driven, but I have to set the stage. I have to give them a purpose. And I think it's really important. So number one is, I think, you know, as a leader, your job is to establish a sense of purpose in everybody. And I'm really specific. When I talk about purpose, I want to be really clear. A purpose is not your mission statement. Your mission statement is a love letter that you send to yourself and then print on vinyl letters 6 feet high in the reception of your office building. Your purpose is what you enable your customers to achieve. As a result of you being you, what's the difference that you make to your customers' lives? And if your employees understand that, that becomes their North Star. In a world where there isn't a manager around the corner for them to be able to immediately, so what do I do with this? That they use that as the guidebook to say, well, okay, given that this is our purpose and given this is the problem I face, then this is the thing I should do. So if you give them a purpose, the second is to think about outcomes rather than process. And so again, it's irrelevant whether Dave has worked 40 hours, 60 hours, 60, it doesn't matter. did he achieve the outcomes that we needed as a team, or is it why I needed him as an individual? And that frees me, you know. Then we talk about flexible work, and flexible working isn't just about location, it's also about time, to say, well, if those are the outcomes, it's kind of up to me. If I choose to, you know, mess around for, take 3 days off, if you like, and so that I've then got to burn, you know, 12 hours a day to get through to the objective, that's my choice. And if I fail, then you have my permission to take whatever disciplinary procedures that is appropriate for that. But at least I've been given that opportunity. And that drives the sort of the third point, which is about the sort of how crucial employee engagement is. Because engaged employees are going to do those things. They're going to work hard. They're going to embrace the ambiguity of empowerment. You know, because some people do like to be told what to do. They want just tell me what to do. You know, just don't make it hard for me. But by being empowered and being engaged, then they're going to work more effectively. And for most leaders, most senior leaders, this is okay, because this should have been how they've been leading for a while. The challenge that lots of organizations are going to have is always the same group of people, and it's the middle managers. And again, you know, generalizations and stereotypes, but typically a middle manager is the least experienced manager in your business. And when you have less experience, you're far more likely to respond with command and control than you are to respond with the confidence of, do you know what, I'm actually going to sit back and I'm going to empower these guys to be successful. So the leaders of the business, you've got to spend time with the middle managers, and you've got to work on that culture. You've got to work on empowering them with the confidence that enables them to manage their team in that way that brings their success. So it's difficult, right? And you know, I know in a lot of businesses you want, you know, something that feels a bit more connected and a bit more immediate, but you know, we're building a very different culture of the organization here, and I think that's what you've got to remember. And also, if you look at how we've all endured, you know, remote working, and also look to the next generation of the workforce, these are the skills that they're growing up with: this remote collaboration, this sort of distributed learning, this distributed you know, playing as well. You know, if you think, you know, I've got a teenage son, as you have, and they collaborate online, they talk to each other online, they do a lot of stuff online. We got to get this right now. We've got to prepare for this world, and it's on our watch that we've got to make this change. If we, you know, again, go back to the stuff that we're comfortable with and familiar with, we actually constrain our ability to be able to work in this way. We reduce our ability to be able to work in this way. And, you know, look, in the worst case, we have another pandemic. It just means that somebody's going to say, well, hang on a minute, you had coronavirus and you didn't learn from that. You didn't change what you did. And I don't think anybody wants to be in that position, but it's not just for the fear of another pandemic. I genuinely believe that when organizations get this right, when they get the leadership right, when they get the cultural right, what emerges is a better outcome for everybody. It's better for your people. It's better for your customers. It's better for the planet. Nobody loses if we can get all this stuff right.
The one area where people are talking about losing coming from is that next generation. And if you're looking at probably the area and the people who will suffer most about this in the short term, it is that sort of school leaver, university leaver, apprentice sort of level person, because the difficulty that people still struggle to get their hands in is empowerment's very easy when you've got skilled people, right? Yeah. When people are trained and when people have those the ability to go out there and do it, you trust them. Say, here's your task. I was speaking to Paul Nansen, you know, Major General of Sandhurst, right? You know, Sandhurst yesterday. Amazing about, you know, talking about exactly the same things that you're talking about in terms of what leadership's about right now. Very, very similar sort of thing, completely different context, but the principles of leadership being exactly the same. Fascinating to look at those two put together. But the issue we've got at the moment, and this is the Achilles heel, in my opinion, that can still drag people back to this, you know, this same, is when you look to scale and when you look to bring in unskilled talent to bring people through and have that next generation. How do you get them to go off and perform at a reasonable level for you without that sort of osmosis of learning, without that sort of ability to to pass on things from each other, without being able to hear something of the experienced guy over the other side of the office, or pick up that from a side by side thing. And again, it's we've got the ability to use Zoom and technology and such like, but there is a big worry about losing that sort of stuff at the same time. How do we get around that?
So look, I think there are. Let's unpack that a bit, because I mean, I think it's a really, really good point. And the thing I think about in flexible working is like a massively personal thing. And it depends on so many variables, right? It depends on, where you are in your career. It depends on your age. It depends on your family situation. It depends on your accommodation situation. And all of these factors will dictate about how much you want to work away from the office. And what we should be really mindful of is we shouldn't be saying, right, well, everybody's, going to work in the same way. That's a wrong thing to do. We've got to understand that there's going to be certain individuals and certain groups of individuals who are going to want more office time than remote time. And I would argue the fresh recruits, the new recruits, and especially graduates and people who are just entering the world of work. So they're not particularly experienced in the world of work. They're not coming, from another business where they've seen it done before. And I think you've got to allow for them to be in the office a bit more, and you've got to provide some kind of framework that makes that happen. The second piece is these are individuals, if we're talking especially about young individuals, but not limited to young individuals, that are used to learning about anything and everything off their own back. They've got a problem. They don't go and ask somebody about it. They'll go and ask YouTube, or they'll go and ask Google, and they'll go and find it out. And the reason that's important is if they can't ask your version of Google or your version of YouTube inside your firewall, then they're not going to find the answer, and they're going to struggle. So you've got to slowly start to pivot the way that you think about collaboration internally. There's been this concept for the last decade or so brought about by social media, really. If you think about, social media is kind of the opposite to the way that we used to collaborate inside the world of work, because social media is I'm open first. That's my starting point, is I'm open. So I'm going to share everything. And then actually I'm going to selectively choose what I won't share to everybody else. Whereas when we collaborated in the office, and this has changed a little bit, but it's still quite true, is my starting position is I'm sharing nothing, right? And this is sticking with me, or, it's going to be stuck in my inbox, or maybe in my team's, my individual's team's repository. The rest of the organization can't have access to it. Well, that's no good. You've got to change that. And all right, there are reasons and areas and spaces where you won't be able to do that. But for the most part, this concept of working out in the open, creating your internal YouTube or your internal Google, whatever it may be, is going to enable those people when they come into the organization to be able to find out stuff for themselves. And they'll be quite happy to do that. And I think, if we get it right at school and in education, we should be developing and nurturing a new generation of talent that comes out not knowing lots of facts about, the date of the Battle of Hastings or whatever, like, because they're just going to look that up, but will instead have skills like critical thinking and collaboration skills and empathy and creativity that will flourish in the environment that we've created. So I do think you need, physical connection for new recruits. I think you've got to think about how you do that. But equally, I think you've got to prepare the ground with that open collaboration such that those individuals can find the information they need and they can crack on without being constrained by that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a very interesting piece that's a whole nother series, let alone show, with regards to education, right? And how
completely
reposition something that's probably been the same education, syllabus for hundreds and hundreds of years, that can be less relevant at various different stages, for preparing people for this. I remember when we started 10 years ago, we were just coming out of the financial crisis and started this business, and I got asked onto the BBC to talk to a whole load of people who were long-term unemployed through that sort of period. Yeah. And again, what was stunning was just the lack of ability that they'd had to be to be skilled for the positions which they wanted to do. And that again, when you looked at young people, particularly at that sort of stage, and what they were prepared for and the value that they could bring to a business with zero understanding of all that, I think it's very, very important to get people work ready. And I think there's been improvements over the last decade for sure. But I think as well, exactly as you just said there is so many different skills rather than 1066 and such like that we can put into people at the moment that can have a real value to the workplace as well.
No, exactly. And also you're going to need that. This whole concept about, let's not just think about kids either, because where we're going and where we were going before this, if we were recording this today in the absence of the pandemic, we wouldn't be talking about flexible working. We'd be talking about AI, machine learning and automation and job losses. And what do we do with people in the workforce whose skills are no longer relevant in the world that we're going into? And that still applies, right? You know, when we're done with this pandemic, we're going to have to go back there. So yes, we need to make sure our kids are fit for purpose, but we've also got to start to think about, are there people in our organization who don't have access to the digital skills that enable them to be a part of this workforce? And you know, we should really be, and now I'm guessing a lot of this audience won't have that, but there'll be lots of other audiences, lots of other businesses where, you know, typically they've never needed access to a device, or we've never really cared about whether they could, you know, navigate the intranet. That's going to change. That has to change. And so we've really got to get into how we build those skills for them.
Yeah. Dave, look, this is, I've just realised how far over time that we've just been there, but it's been an utter pleasure. I know you got to get ready for your smash hit YouTube show any second as well now. And please do, if you're watching this, please do subscribe to it. It's been brilliant viewing. I've loved every episode so far, and it's become the staple of a Wednesday at 6, like Home and Away used to be.
Jesus, I'm not sure that's a great benchmark, Toby.
Listen, Dave, it's been brilliant talking to you as always. I'm so pleased that everything's been going well, and you're continuing to add the value that you always have done to everyone out there, all through different mediums. People out there who are struggling with some of this, who want to reach out and chat some more, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, the best way, brilliantly, is actually through the YouTube channel. So if you just go to YouTube and you search on The Rise of the Humans, you'll find the content there, but also you can chat with me there and sort of just, we can have a conversation. Equally, Twitter, I'm at Coplin on Twitter, so we can pick things up there, and it'd be great. Because I mean, the whole point of that, and it's where we started, isn't it, Toby, is, you know, none of us alone have the answers. It's only collectively that we can figure this out together. So that's why I love this sort of new world. It really is a two-way conversation rather than necessarily just sitting and transmitting from a stage in some conference room somewhere.
Yeah, well, it's a brave new world. I'm glad.
Yeah, totally.
Dave Coplin, absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Dave, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Toby.